Yeah. 당한 좋단다. nga ba wang chu gi kalung zam cholam tu mi rung was tanang aju ti to de ro.
We're doing the fifth one, which is the unsuitability of the mere instructions in scriptures. This should be Maheshwara, not Ishvara. It's another way of referring to Shiva. So the scriptures of Maheshwara being a path for liberation.
다 가장 사변 수줍 초관이 기부 미제 반님이 딜마고의 메소스 메섹소 다전 초과 태치로스 디 가장 자와 되번 친사버와.
And so yesterday we finished the one that said rituals performed on seeds and so forth. That one, along with the commentary, we finished that.
다 가지기 야 들리지 송기요래. 응어지와도 지양 치르세제 다단도 진세 다 진세 제용돼 다 진세 곧 다와망고 도저 당지도 진세 제용돼 되니 응아르 미딕보초 임바 응아르 미딕신 인데바디 되니 진세 다와망고도 진세 제용돼 안 디바 타기 요바다 체마도스 디바디 타기 요바다 체마 요레스 카리 요레스 라바이나 angар jinse mache kongla midi kelo chayundu midi subuchi wa yobache ta jinse cheyongdu dende jinse chebal dene chiso midi kelo chayundu ani midi yangbushu chawa dende tonyandu was odi kajidik disegore ngarchi wa ta chiyang chiris ngarchi wa da chiyang chiris.
The next one, which is who were earlier heavy, later become lighter. Here the view that, like what they're saying is that when someone engages in these ritual practices, for instance, when one is doing fire pujas for a long period of time, what one sees is that at the end of this practice, after this entire practice is over, after these rites have been concluded, we see that there are signs that this person who was earlier a sinful person or had a lot of non-virtuous karmas, that they remove them or they have been purified, because when you weigh the person, the amount that they weighed before and the amount they weighed after is lighter. And therefore, because their weight is reduced, that's an indication that they have purified some of the karma.
Deba lung tele shebe jinse gi choge digwa chomba thupde digji jinse chene sangla chalwetse ngar chi wata chi yangwar songwa thongwi chirshenas.
The commentary says, they say the fire puja ritual mentioned in the scriptures does destroy non-virtue, because when a sinful person who has performed the fire puja is weighed on a scale, it is seen that those who were earlier heavy later become lighter.
Ta thela ranglugi digwa chombar cheba min di chini mejurge luje minjir digje min chere.
And the response is, it does not serve a non-virtue. Its heaviness is gone, but not that of non-virtue, because non-virtues are not physical.
Ta deba jinsi chebe ludi chiwani mebar kyurge digwa chombar cheba minde digwa luje mimbi chir sangar chiwa mimbi chiris.
Ke sangar chiwa se na kar?
Kelo jahid. Kelo jani yama tae choro te.
No. Tadi sangar chiwa mimbi ngeti.
Kelo le kya yundu?
No.
Digwal chechung tae yomaris kelo kana.
So then in the commentary that last bit is not there because I didn't know what it was, but now you can add it. So the commentary to this is, by performing the fire puja, the heaviness of the body may have gone, but non-virtue has not been severed, because non-virtues are not physical and they cannot be weighed on a scale.
So zata jinsi cheba digi ngar lu chiwadi meba yuwadi nga tsu thongurwa thonya yorwa de di gyumzingi digwa chomba duptuku mares Digwa thaba di drup tuku mares, lu yangwa chaba digi, lu gi jigse ma chaba digi, digwa thaba drup tuku mares. Gyumzen kharishila na digwa sukjen marwas. Ta sukjen yinba yin, ani ngari mangbo du ta nyungru chen shaasi, kelo kyan laya yung chokuruwa, sangka laya kyan yung lap chokuruwa. So za digwa sukjen ma yinba yindu, ko ngar jigu digas tu, ta tanda yangru chen shaasi, kecha shasa, kelo gani kecha shasa yo marwa. Di meba lu ngar chiwa di chi yangwa chaba di digwa tabi tala dhubtuku mares, digwa tabi tala shetuku mares.
So the reason why they're saying this is, it's true that after seeing such rituals, one sees that their body has become lighter, but that fact that the body is lighter is not sufficient to demonstrate that one's non-virtues non-virtuous karmas have reduced, because when you weigh a body on a scale, that is something that, being physical, can be seen to increase or decrease in how much it weighs. But because virtues and non-virtues, so these karmas are not physical, they're not something that can be weighed on a scale. So using that as a reason to say that the karma has reduced because when you weigh the body, it's lighter, is not sufficient, because karma is not something that can be weighed or that has physical substance.
So zada nangamu ta dinde yobare. Chumdinde sheshube kablayan tagaran cheje khandar jinsi gi choga kyangkyang la zuen ani digba tatab che dinge gi diduni ku shukchumbu duwa.
So this use of rituals, especially this fire pujas, is something that from very long back, from the time of the Buddha, it was a very kind of common or widely practiced method to try and purify one's karma.
Pache nyindu chumbu sungyang tegaran isayda. Chumdende gi loma macha kongla koranya nyamlin zogda wadi dinde jik jinsi gi choga shu che dinge dinde gi ta lama chumbu dinde jik yin samso Mahakashyapa.
So even Mahakashyapa, if I'm correct, Mahakashyapa was also, before becoming a disciple of the Buddha, Mahakashyapa was also one whose main practice was fire pujas to purify karma.
Sonzanta ta jinsi che yundu sala jinsi pyugo orwa. Soza sala jinsi pyuje. Ani digba thaya ki sala jinsi pyuje. Ani digba thaya ki je di she digi yoba yundu jumden digi tiwash tangche. Pache Korani jinte nawe kadula tiwa tangche. Ani gyukshu chi yores. Midi gyukshu paro lo drowar digu yores. Tapshi kari yores. Tiwa tangwa.
So what one does essentially in fire pujas is there's these substances that then are burnt in the fire, but they're done directed towards a deity. And so when Buddha and Mahakashyapa first met, Buddha asked Mahakashyapa this question. He said, there's a river and there's someone who wishes to get across the river, to cross to the other shore of the river.
Tine di tiwa tang yundi kogi lendi gyabshe. Ani chu ting rinpo me na kumbha yandron digires. Kisi chu di ting chenpo yo na tos ting rinpo yo na gel yandro shokures. Ani gel shingi me na ani chula dendro shokures. Padroya ki tablam dende yores.
So when the Buddha asked, how does this person get across? Mahakashyapa replied, if the water is shallow, they can walk across. If it's deep, then they can swim across, and if they don't know how to swim, then they can get across on a boat.
Tene jumne de tiwa tangche, tanga kumbha yan gyagi me, gel yan gyagi me, chula yan dichigi mes, ina nga padrogo yos lamna, ani tapshi kari yores.
So then the Buddha asked, he said, I don't want to walk, I don't want to swim, and I don't want to get in a boat. What other means are there for me to be able to get across the river?
Ani didi konge, yosonge, ta dende khandi sikires. Kumbha yan gyagi me, drugi mes, drunang la shiongi mes, lamna pake khandi sikires. Ani di tsuru di deche, nga tru pachu drogo yo labdewa zongi paligi marwas. len di kyabar.
At which point Mahakashyapa said, how's that even possible? You don't want to go, you don't want to walk, you don't want to make an effort, and you don't want to swim. Just by sitting on this side of the river, you say you want to get on the other shore, but just because you said it, it's not going to happen unless you do something.
Di len kyab tu gala ni chumne degi. Kheran tharpa thobegi lam nyamne chide di tahu mindu bes.
So then the Buddha asked Mahakashyapa, he said, isn't the path that you are cultivating, practicing to get across to liberation, it's not the same as this?
So di lab yundu ani ngi dishun bo lapsa sem di cheche. An dindi ina ta khari chokres.
And so then, because what the Buddha said really struck a chord with Mahakashyapa, he immediately said, okay, then, well, what does one do?
This is ani demba ma song she ani da nyinde chumne di lo ma cha rabdu chung lo ma cha ma se ada chumne di demba chite se gi gesap cha barwa.
And when then he asked the Buddha gave him, the Buddha taught him the four truths. And then Mahakashyapa became a follower of the Buddha. He became ordained. And not just that, but then he became like the regent of the Buddha's teaching.
Oh, dire. So that di nyamne chiding ngari na pe shuk chumbore. Ta thadi chala paji yobe so ro sto. Thadi chala ya.
This practice was very common earlier, but it's also very common today.
So di indu da di cheba digi jinsi tu cheba digi digba thagi yoba di ta duburwa o di dubiala tanda rigba di tangma so se gori.
So what kind of the essence is to the reason that you have given to say that one's karma gets purified by engaging in certain rites or pujas is not the reason that you've given doesn't support the fact that that's possible.
Dire. Tadamdo pandin churagi da jinsi cheba dijugudila wangda jinsi ni di kaba ma do shamba mangbo mi duwa. Ta loben ligdenji gi toge bawa nanglo da shu ka sha yor. Khari ka sha yoreslana da chu di cheje digwa thae ge je she da tene di mayum bata nyung ni khazang zo ge je she ge se masa wa shin digwa nyung ne de je digwa thae ge je she da tene mangbo she sha ba de re loben ligden ge kain di mangbo shu ka sha yor.
So in the Pramanavartika Acharya Dharmakirti only is addressing initiations and fire pujas, but in this blaze of reasoning, which is Acharya Bhaviveka's text, he refutes many different kinds of such rites or rituals, such as ablution, washing oneself with water, or like we said yesterday, fasting, things like that are used as means to purify karma. Acharya Bhaviveka, he refutes all of them, many of them.
Oh, dire. So so khazanga ju shubna shin cheje lube ledengi rigba chigde se masa ni nyungor neba digi deba di gewaris lab yundi ani se masa ban deba di gewa mainde se sawa digwa maim bichirs rigba tusnayer.
And one reason that Acharya Bhaviveka gives is fasting is not virtuous because eating is not non-virtuous.
Oh, dus rigba tayer. Oh, dindigi da rigba mangbo yore kesi chama kerazu jeto toge bawa jeto ne digor.
So if you want to see with all these various kind of reasons that Acharya Bhaviveka gives, it's also in English, I think. The Blaze of Reasoning. You can look at that text.
Toge bawa injina yore.
Yes, it's there, no? Blaze of Reasoning in English. Yeah. No, this is the one by Bhaviveka. Yeah, I think it's there in English.
So so toge bawa nala di rigba mangbo sung shaba di zu dudu cheche tanda ngi dinshi tebde no kwe shayarwa.
In Tadi injina
Yomara dingi jela gyunni treusla.
So all of these reasons that are there in the Blaze of Reasoning, a summary of all of them. I have written them in my book on the four truths, which doesn't exist in English. So then I will give you an English translation when it comes. No, I myself will translate it. Okay.
When you all became too much old, that time you will get this book.
Hatta conclude işte.
Ta dinima wangi sibi gula minu bahas.
The next section is initiations cannot harm the cause of existence.
Ta kaji gi wang shuyundu wang di toba ina wang di gi sibi gyu korwa kye le gyu jirwa korwa kye wa lembi gyu khari ina gyu tela wang shuba ina wang di gi ta sibi gyu tela nyugi res kaji gi ta dila gorwa kaji la na wang di top she ani siba li chugu res la gi yudu ta ranglo gi wang gi ani sibi gyu tela nyugi ma res.
So what here is being said is that the seed for taking birth, or the seed for rebirth, that is something that when one receives initiation, that initiation has the power to nullify that seed or to kind of remove that ability from the seed to produce its result.
Tā tsawa chenyundu lokshe dhani teli chung seba semba wang thaki meni drowa kewa yin tijir dro me gyur tesam le ni chung wechi kewa teda yinu yin semba teda rangi le yin chirirs.
And so then the verse is this. There's a few, I don't know why I've made these little, can you make a few changes in the punctuations? Wrong consciousness, craving that arises from it, and intention. Instead of a full stop, can you put a semicolon? Through their power, beings are born in inferior states. Therefore, those who sever them will not migrate. Because it arises only from these, just these are able to cause birth, and then it should be a comma. Because intention accompanying those itself is karma.
Deba, kini dunge la dewar trube lokshe thang. Tele chungwe seba thang. Tingi do sungdengi sembe wangi membe neso drowa kewa yinbi chir te sum chena ke neso drowa megyuro di sigang thangbu shidigi.
Because it is through the power of wrong consciousness that one mistakes suffering states as happiness, craving that arises from it, and intention that is concomitant with these two. What? It is from intention that is concomitant with these two that beings take birth in inferior states. No,
Sibor gyawala teda nyigi pendo nuba yindi gyu tezamle yangsi chima jungwi chiro.
So again, and it is intention that is concomitant with these two that beings take birth in inferior states. When these two are severed, one will not migrate to such states. It is from just these causes that subsequent existence arises.
Ta tanda dela lokshe dhani dele jo seba semba wang thagi yeseje ta sumkecha sheche. Chinju logi loji che seba che an nyamdu le sejirwa. Ta tanda de le she yundu le di kari shere ani decha da sungdengi le di. Ta kanda decha da sungdengi le. Yamena ta tanda ngi decha da sungdengi le la she chogure dunge la kini dunge la dewar chubi lokshe da sungdengi semba yang she chogure. Di yundu teki da sungdengi semba aseji. Te sumbu di ani kari resa na drowa kewa limbi gyuri resta kanda kewi gyudi che. Ta te sum che sha na ani kowa la kegi maare, kowa la dugu maare, keni chima la dugu maare, korwa keni la sakura, korwa la dugu maare. Di yundu ta korwa siba kowa la keba la te sum changso na ta taga siba keba ta che robar chima la. Di yundu siba te samgi pendo dugu res. Gymzen kare gyu te samni yangsi chima jungwe cher se di ani di tanda te samli ni jungwe cher se di.
It's actually fine. Sorry, it's right the way I've put it because it's a long sentence. That's why it's weird. But it's saying because it is through the power of three things. One, wrong consciousness that mistakes suffering states as happiness. So it's the consciousness itself that's mistaking suffering states as happiness. Craving that arises from this wrong consciousness, and intention that is concomitant with these two. So it is because of these three things that beings take birth in inferior states. So intention that is concomitant with these two refers to the intention that is concomitant with craving that arises from wrong consciousness, and the intention that is concomitant with the wrong consciousness. So when these three causes are there, it is from these or through the power of these three that beings take birth in inferior states. When these three are severed, so maybe there should be a full stop here. When these three are severed, one will not migrate to such states. That's why it is just from these causes that subsequent states of existence arise, which means when there are these three, again, wrong consciousness that is mistaking states that are suffering to be happiness, craving that arises from such wrong consciousness, and intention that is concomitant with these two, one takes birth in inferior states. When these are not there, when these have been removed, such migration does not arise, which is why, if these three are there, just these three are sufficient for subsequent existence to arise.
Tadi 가정 아주 얘기 조사해봐. 리그버치마 3절비 유소 시에 카둘라 규딩 아주 가정이만 깨져 시에서와.
So this fact that these are like this craving and wrong consciousness, we had said earlier, if you remember, as being causes for existence.
자와카르레.
Do you remember the root verse? The verses? Of craving and wrong consciousness.
디 겨발렘비 규인바데.
Wrong perception of suffering and tightly bound desire are causes of birth. For one without these, there is no birth.
Can you explain that?
So the first cause is wrong perception of suffering, which is the consciousness which mistakes suffering states as happiness.
달라 차고 탕된 베세들도 어디르샤오디 소자 달라 차고 탕된 바세 디니 고속체 마게 샴기 타마디 카세고 여샤버디 가르레 둥이 친지 로로다스 세고군이 칭원이 깨주칸라 테메가 데니 깨워 미규로세게 타마 시간시디 다다디디시디.
So the beginning of those verses was when you have attachment to the self, and then at the end there was when there is wrong consciousness that perceives suffering to be happiness and craving, that itself will give rise to attachment. Do you remember that those last four lines?
시간 다 쇼로가 니요.
There's two verses. Do you remember? Yeah. By having attachment to the self, and then there's one verse, and then there's that next verse. So that last verse, that second verse, this is a further explanation of that.
다간다 달라 차고 탕된 바세 디기 탕고 쇼로가 디기 디니 규레스 게제시 쇼로가 치마 디기 디니 메나 끼기 말레스. So 둥이 친지 로로다 세고군이 칭원이 깨주칸라 테메바 데니 깨워 미규로스 다다디. right? So that the shologa ni shologa ni budi dom daw thanda dire ta garan shego ro digi kigire ani thesamni ni jungwe shirse di je drom mi gyur se di mena king mare se.
So these lines here are like a summary summary of those earlier verses where that first verse how does it start, the first verse? Right, that one. Right, by having attachment to the self, not being led by others, that's saying when these are there, then birth will arise. And the next verse says when these are not there, birth will not arise. So this one is like a summary of those two, which is saying that as long as you have attachment to self, and as long as you have wrong perception, without being led by others, you will have birth. When these are absent, birth will not come. So this is like a summary of those again.
Da mixiji de kariyorsrana di kabla chiju lo de da segwani mado ani semba de sheyo mare. Le di sheyo mare le. Semba yorwa semba sheyo mare. Ta thanda de la ngargi lokshe da ngar sheshaba na chinju logi lo lokshe de dungela devar tribu lokshe de dang ani sebani di yimba che di nyamdo semba di sher semba khari sher la na tingi do sungding semba di sher di indu dela tanda dela sum she so wa da towa khari sher la na tingi do sungding semba di sher.
So unlike the earlier two verses, there it only spoke of two things, wrong perception and craving. And over here, adding to those, so because it says when these three, it speaks of three over here, what it adds to the earlier presentation, which was missing earlier, was this part of intention. So the addition of intention as a third factor, this intention refers to karma. It's that mental factor of intention, which is karma. And it's talking about an intention or karma that is concomitant with both wrong consciousness and craving. So this is being added to the presentation earlier. And so there's a third factor that's being brought in now.
So that tanda dela ngargi ni gyuni bu dikang la semba di towa japche shego gyumsen khare lamna tiwa khari lebre lana legen gyur mugo sam shena se ani le gomar ves tanda dela gyu tetsam gi chungwe sir labdu gang la khar chabare tetsam gi chungwe sir sidu ani chinju logi lo de da dini gyu dini bu ma gyu dini bu de chungba na ta ke droye chi tetsam gi chungdu gre skeje shen de ani dinyamdo la le yomar ve le gi gyudi yomar ve se tiwa de le gi yoba indu digi lentela legen gürmü gosam shena tinge de sundingi semba teda lehim beshir gyöme tos.
The reason why Acharya Dharmakirti is bringing in intention or karma as another factor is because in the commentary, if you see, it says, if you wonder or if one wonders. So here the idea is that someone says, wait a minute, but earlier you said that that's enough. If just from these causes subsequent existence arises, earlier you had said from those two causes, isn't it also the case that you need karma? The reason why Acharya Dharmakirti is addressing this, bringing in the discussion on intention, is because there is this doubt that says, if craving and wrong perception were enough, then don't we also have to consider karma as a factor? And so Acharya Dharmakirti says there's three things, and there's no such fault that we're not speaking of karma, because intention that is concomitant with these two itself is karma. So the reason why we're speaking of intention here is because this intention itself is karma, and therefore there's no fault of not considering karma or not understanding that karma is also essential for birth to arise.
So that di tanan liunibagi deba khanala lendi war dusije.
So in the commentaries to this second chapter, you find this being mentioned like this.
So that dela ta tingi de sungdingi semba teda leyimbi cher se digi kajigi legen gyur go marwe se tiwa tangya teda ranglugi tingi de sungdingi semba leyimbi cher se di lendi khandis thep go re di leyin dang khandere di lendi khandis thep gi re skeje chi yongdu dila tes shigida kariso gore keba suzu gi dishi gyapdan tes gonyo bu dawchi.
So when Acharya Dharmakirti gives this answer saying this intention is karma and that intention is concomitant with these two states, as a reply to isn't karma also required for birth to arise, when Acharya Dharmakirti says karma is required, there's no problem with what you're saying, because karma is required, not only is required, but it's there, and the karma that's there is intention, that mental factor of intention that is concomitant with these two states. In explaining how this responds to their doubt about how karma is needed for birth, there are many kind of slightly convoluted, not convoluted, but like a little difficult to understand, the various explanations that are given to explain how such intention that is concomitant with these two is karma required for birth. The various explanations are a little complicated or a little difficult to understand.
So that tanda dela lenchi yungre 데이터 흉나라 제 마소 nga랑 삼주레 테미디 미시 더잘 하고 그러 테마데
디멘체게.
아
디멘체.
단다 렌지 리그로 봐
로스.
달당 렌지 리그로 봐디 흉나라 제요 말에 디 nga랑 삼주 티샤브레 디인디 렌디 딱다치 더덕 딩이도 총딩이 샘바 레임베 시르세기 고아디기 렌디 딱다 탭기 미시 이나야 단당이 nga랑 삼주디 디고샤요.
So the answer that we're going to see now in the commentary, it's not from other texts that I've seen. I don't know if it's right or if it's accurate. It's my own position, or it's my own view, and so it's not something that I can say with certainty is correct, because I haven't found this presentation in any of the various commentaries.
다 넘버스 당보 렌디 마슈콘라 시에고에 가리올라나 가조 텐데 야라 중이 깨지 시에인데 다 가장 가조 레드 니모왕기 깨왈링기 레스 깨지 시에인데 아니 레 당보 사야시 머릭비 꾸니랑네 아니 니몬 깨제 다 가다 당진기 꾸니랑네 당보 니몬지게 니몬티기 당보 레직 사기로 와다 레직 사윤데 베나 니송 펜지기 레직 사바이나 딘디기 레디 사겐디 레디 사야데라 소 레디 사겐디 넘버십 가르소거래 가주 이 레디 사기로 와다 이기 레데다 냠도 류다 가기 레디야 서포트 리그로 와다 류유고네 파주미디 소제버체 와 아니 가기 고네 소제베 카도 칭인 담에 셰버체 다 이네 조조디 낭로기 셈바 파로부드 센디 유kulung 파로딜 미가베 당셈 지요로와 소도 디숨가냠도 소제 아니 미직 세베이나 다 녀손 개와기 녀손 편지기 레지 사버와 다 딘데기 레디 사사디 디 레디 카르레스라나 딘디 레디 카르라나 가주기 남시기 띵도 마란수기 두바 이기 넘버 셰바기 띵도 디숨부디 냠도 초네 녀손 라마 기에기 뉴바 박자지 시작이요 디 아니 딘디 이거 뒤지기 레세티래 당부디 고추고래.
So before we look at this kind of answer, one thing for you all to please bear in mind is, if you've heard of when they speak of the 12 links of dependent arising, there's the first link, which is ignorance, and then there's the second link, which is called formative actions. In the second link, for instance, when motivated by ignorance, if you engage, for instance, if you engage in actions that are for propelling actions or propelling karma, for like taking birth in an inferior state, then, for instance, if you have this strong wish, that is the wish to kill, and then that is followed by actions which are the mental actions to want to kill somebody, and accompanied with verbal and physical actions of bringing that act to completion, then when you do these actions, when these actions are performed, then these actions, they kind of leave an imprint, or they leave a habit, an imprint I think is the most correct one, on the third link, which is consciousness. But this consciousness is mental consciousness, right? So the first, motivated by ignorance, you engage in various actions. For instance, you engage in actions of killing that are then accompanied with physical and verbal actions. All these three leave a kind of imprint on the mental consciousness. So the actions that are leaving this imprint, those actions are the second link of formative actions.
다디 니버 두지기 레디 가르차송 니버 두지기 레세디 디체 다 딘디기 수마 다 남시기 딩도 고 여러와 다 미디 도 시제 타마 다 시스템 참몽도 다 치와 온도 마주기 응라 치와 온도 마주기 응라 디니 세바 가주지기 다 디바룰라 세바 계단기 개발기로 율세비 세바 계단기 개발기 딘디 세바 계단기 개발지기 아니 가르치기래 디 뉴버 투진도 소용 그래 단다디 니버 두지기 레 수모남시기 된도 샤샤베 뉴버텔 파자텔라 드니 ko sue tabje geba seba do guba lemba ni gi sue tabje sue tab yondu ko niba tujin cha yondu ani juba siba se ashke shigir ten ler.
So the second one, which are these formative actions, when the action has been done and it is in a latent state, that latent state then that carries on with consciousness, like with mental consciousness that stays like an imprint or as a non-manifest state, it stays like as an imprint. Then at some point, when through the factor of craving that is to a specific kind of object, or craving that is directed at something, what this craving does is it kind of, it's like it waters this karma, it starts ripening it. And when it starts ripening this karma, and this karma gets fully ripened, then it becomes what is called in the 12 links, the 10th one of existence. So the second link is karma, and the 10th link is also karma. It's an action. It's karma. Both of these are both karma. One is when the action is performed and it stays in a latent state for the entire duration. And then the other one is after it has been matured or it has been kind of ripened by craving and it has reached its state of having become ripe. Then it's called existence, which is that 10th link.
Ta digi kowaro duslendigirwa shinga nanglo la sabyen tangbo tabe khabido gi sabyen di niba duji gi ledche ta sabyen de tabche nima sumgi jela ani nyugu ke gozugo yona sabyen tele nyugu ya tyang gozugo yoba yina ta gozugo yoba yina ani nima nyugu ya ma tyang gi ngela ta ko chude lulu ji sabyen tele du ji sabyen nuba chero tang de khadu ji yorwa odi chuba siba se asoro oda didich koalen digdwa
Chupa tiba getan the tsam dima minchim be kabla zungu
chuba siba de ta khande nima sumba jela nyugu ya tyungge yena de mathen be nguen tela de mathen sge nguen tela ta ko bad ko ta min sangye so dobji.
So as an example, if you put a seed in a field, that seed that you put in the field, it's kind of like the second one, which is formative actions. Then if 3 days later you start to see the seed sprout, then before that sprout arose, for those 3 days, by the water and fertilizer and heat and moisture and all of that, that seed that ability to become a sprout was increasing. So it was ripening, and that ability of the sprout, the ability to produce the sprout or to become a sprout that was ripening for those 3 days, existence, which is this 10th link, is like that moment before when its ability is complete, just before it gives rise to a sprout. So that would be like existence.
Yes, odila da chuba sivas la ro da di indu le de ni cha so ni ba du ji le chi da chuba siba gi le se ni dwa.
So when you say karma, there's two. One is the second link, which is formative actions, and then there is the 10th, which is existence. Both are karma.
Yes, ta di indu da le gyang gyur mi go sam se gi chuba de la pa an chuba di dogdo mala ba she pa kha gyur she ni ba du ji gi le ani gyulo go mar ves chuba thang bo dil pa ja ni ba du ji gi le gyur mi go sam shenas.
So in that question, which is, isn't karma also needed, then this can be further understood in two ways, which is, isn't the cause that is the second link of formative actions needed? So when they're saying, isn't karma needed? One doubt is, isn't karma that is the formative action, which is the second link, that also needed?
Dije. Ta ditwa tang yundu ani digi lendela dir themata kewa jungwi gyushebe kab yimbi cher. So niba duji gi le gyur go marves la du gala niba duji gi le gyu gore de thanda di shego mares kajna thanda di themata kewa jungwi gyula gari yores thanda cheba che kab yidi di thanda cheba che mar ka di tharum budres.
So here the reply to that is that even though that may be needed, there's no need to discuss that over here, because what we're trying to understand here is the immediately preceding cause, or what cause immediately precedes birth. What the second link is not something that is immediately preceding birth, but it is way back. There's a big gap between birth and the second one where the action is performed. So why here we're not addressing formative actions or the second link is because what we're talking about here on this occasion, the causes that immediately precede birth are being discussed.
다 지원 니바 당시 다 니바 뒤지 레디 단다 시험고 юм센 지기도스 이나 아니 테마탑이 규들라 주버시바 요로와스 주버시바디 테마탑이 규들라 주버시바 요바인디 테마탑이 규를 주버시바 요베 셰르 셰나스 디셰고로 디셰마송와스 레디 요로와스.
And so then the next question is, okay, fine, let's assume that the second link is not relevant in this discussion, but the 10th one of existence definitely is. Why isn't that being brought up?
다디 라비용디 딜레 뉴바 투진도 규르베 디디기 남시 티니 케네소 닌삼저비 규르제베 갑 임베 텔랑아르셰바 대sam도 녜소스.
And so the answer is here because what is being discussed is the resultant consciousness on which the ability of karma has become strong. This itself is the cause that connects to a subsequent state. And this is what is being analyzed here. Just what has been discussed before is definitive.
So that dikala orsidu tematabi gyula chuba siba yoro was tematabi gyula chuba siba yores. 이네 단다 디양 단다 시기요 말레스 단다 시고예요 말레스 가르진라나 렌 뉴버 투진도 규르사니 렌 뉴버 투진도 규르차베 가두기 디두기 남시죠와 디두기 땅어도 규두기 남시도 디두기 남시서 가서 계지 시기요와 소서 렌 뉴버 타르진도 규르차베 제라 넘버 셰버디 아니 녀송기 풍볼라 참저비 규가르레스 디렌 뉴버 타진 규르차바체 답변은 녀송 편이 렌 뉴버 투진 쇠사래 다 소세베 젤라 다 넘버 셰버 마 참주라라 규카리 고레 디 제바치베 까비인디 코양 시하고 말레스.
So this thing here which says consciousness on which the ability of karma has become strong, there's two kind of, they're divided in two ways. One is resultant consciousness at the time of the result and consciousness at the time of the cause. Here, consciousness at the time of the result refers to that consciousness upon which the ability or the potential of that karma, that imprint, has become strong. It's reached a point where it is strong to a degree where it now is able to connect immediately with birth. Because what we're addressing here is what is absolutely essential to talk about just before birth. What we need to consider is that consciousness on whom the ability to give rise to birth has reached its maximum state. And because that is what we're considering over here, that 10th link of existence is also not required or doesn't need to be addressed.
다 디카도 데라 삼로 당다 니도 삼로 당다 니지리그레 다 당보디 두슬람도 디그로와 주버시바 렌뉴버 투진차 다 렌뉴버 투진차 사비제라 아니 게넬라다 개와치마기 게넬라 마만로 콩델라 디바루라 카리요레슬라디 디바루델라 렌뉴버 투진도 규르사바 디기 아니 풍볼라 둥엘라 친줄로도 추베 록셰 풍볼라 세베 세바 디니도 숭댕이 셈바디기 유르파 요두고 요디 디숨기 파도 제제 아니 개와치마라 주루그레스 디시직디체
케디 리림 닉타도 고노소
렌뉴버 투진 차사오체
디주바시바디체
주바시바체 다 렌뉴버 투진 차사비 제라 다 렌뉴버 투진 차심베 넘버셰바 기지 치마디다 풍부디니네 마텐지 마도고로와 디도와라 디파루기 넘버셰바 텔라 겐 카리오레슬라나 도야라 겐 카리올라나 친줄로글로 세바 and 디니도 숭딩이 셈바 유르 요와디 요레스.
Okay. So here, just so that's clear, how do you understand this is, when we talk about the 10th link of existence, that's a state where the abilities have become like they have fully ripened. Okay? Now, after this and before there is birth, this fully ripened state resides on consciousness, and now the mind or this consciousness needs to move from one state to another. In that phase post-existence, when this consciousness is moving from one state to another, what is required for it to move from this state to the next one are three factors. One is wrong consciousness and craving, and the intention, which, if you remember, the function of intention is to direct the mind towards an object, right? It's to move the mind towards an object. This concomitant mental factor of intention, these three things are required after existence and before it connects to the next life. So in that interim phase, this is what is being discussed over here. And what is needed in this phase are these three things.
다 대시 찍들라 대시 고와 셴바 찍라 디니니 넘버 셰바 카트 넘버 셰바 카트 제 파르도 레서 파르도 줄사다 다 파르도 버시바디 다 끼네랭 거와 버시바디 신이 끼실 dro거와 소 끼실 dro윤디 아니 콩기 끼네 다 끼네를 주고디 당보 끼네디 통용디 끼네 둥에 바지글라 둥에 끼네 지글라 데버트베 록시지게 아니 풍볼라 세바지게 아니 델라 슝드기 심중 셈바 숨냠도 좀체 아니 버시바디 끼실 주주고 됐어 디인디 딜셰지 디시니 도와.
So that's one way to present it. Another way in which this is presented is this: after you reach this 10th link of existence, then that's the end of this life, which is followed by this interim phase between this life and the next conception, birth referring to conception over here, right? In that interim phase, which is known as Bhardo, that intermediate state, the person who is in that state of Bhardo, because the consciousness has to still go to the next state of birth, which begins at conception, there is the wrong consciousness that sees the state of birth that they're going to take as happiness, when actually it is the nature of suffering. So there's a wrong perception. This wrong perception is then accompanied with the wish for that, the craving for that, and along with that craving, then there is a mental factor of an intention that directs the mind or pulls the mind towards that. And so the other way of understanding this is in that intermediate state, when one is about to, before conception arises, the state where the consciousness goes and joins is seen to be of the nature of happiness when it's not. So wrong conception, there's craving towards that because one sees it as the nature of happiness. And then there's that pull that it has, or the mind that moves towards it, which is intention. So that's the other way of explaining this.
So that di nigala thanda tsikdi nigala kowalen chore. Len nuba tujindu kurbe didi namshe tini kenisu ninsam jarwe gyu se di nigala koer.
So the resultant consciousness on which the ability of karma has become strong is itself the cause that connects to a subsequent state, which is what is being analyzed here. This consciousness on which the ability of karma has become strong can refer to both the one that comes after existence before connecting to the next state, or that comes in the intermediate state of Bhardo that connects to birth. It can refer to both.
So that tangbo parsigang keja mashebashi kyawa tegarangal keja shebayina chisim gozu yungdu chisim goma zugi kongla len nuba tuji cha tsabri.
So if you consider it according to the first explanation, which is without considering the Bhardo state, but in this life itself, when that mind of death, when the process of death begins, and so the mind is undergoing death, or consciousness is undergoing death, at that point, this ability or this potential of karma has already become strong.
So juba siba len nuba tuji cha tsar. Ta len nuba tuji cha tsar ne chisim gozu yundi len nuba tuji cha tsar. Tini chisim gozu yundi chisim rakwani chamu bala dro yundi chamu le leso na lo de ngazo lo misiba cha do. Ta ngazo ni tubu ma kudu na shin chi tini ngazo sheba yu le che da nzu samu nuba ma cha do wa ko di cha do wa. So that chisim rakwa rakwe chisim rakwa chamu la mandro ge paru de la di paru de la ta tanda 친주로 디디 튜난게 친주로 로 끼기래 되니 풍보도 같은 데에 세바디에 디디 끼기래 아니 디디 율라파슈 얘기 율라파 돈데기 되니 심준 셈바기 레가디양 디디 슉충불리기래 디숨부디 디딜리기래
in this process of death, the potential of karma has become strong means that thing is finished, right? As strong as it could have gotten, it's become strong at that point. From that moment on, you have the mind that is undergoing the death process. So after it has reached that, this is that 10th state, that's existence. After that, when the mind starts to undergo the process of dying, it reaches a final state of becoming unclear, kind of like when you fall asleep, when you're just about to enter into deep sleep, the mind gets dull and it becomes unclear. In that phase so that's the complete termination of that death process. Before that mind that has become completely unclear and has reached the culmination of that ongoing process of death, in that phase, after the karma has reached its final potential and has become strong, and there is this unclarity, which is the final state, in that middle phase is what is being spoken of when you're not considering it with bhardo. And in that state, what starts to happen is you start to have these appearances or these wrong conceptions that start to arise, which are accompanied with craving, which doesn't want to be separated from the aggregates. And without wanting to be separated from the aggregates, this craving, along with the mistaken perceptions, leads the mind to want to move towards or try and take or gravitate towards things. So that's this intention. So with the wrong perception and the craving not to be separated from the aggregates, the mind starts to latch on to something, to try and catch on to something. And that's that mental factor of intention. So these three are then what leads to birth. That's how it's understood with respect to this life before one completely dies.
kewi gyudi karire skeja shedi kewi gyudi taringu geja diyan mimbache le nuba tujin cha masawe ngoyengi geja di mimbache le nuba tujin khorangi geja di mimbache di sangma cha sawi jela ani di paru dela chisim thamola malegi pardu ani ma kewa chima doyu di paru le gyu ta chima doyegi gyu karigi chigi yoris di cheba chigi yori so di cheba chigi yoba indi di cheba chegi gyu dela zo kare dungila chinjulugi loteda seba nidire 아니 대냠도 레지가 여래 디 레디 니바 두지기 레티야 말에 주바 시바기 레티야 말에 대도 숭딩기 심중 셈바 율루 요싱이 디레스 따탄다 대시하고 김진 디레스 딱 셰바 디르다.
Maybe if you add one word in English, it just might make the whole thing easier. Because the resultant consciousness on which the potential of karma has already, if you just add already, I think there might be a lot of, it'll be easy to understand. Yeah? So what it's saying is that okay, the already? Here, because the resultant consciousness on which the potential of karma, on which the ability of karma, you have that, has already become strong. It just says has become strong, just add already. Okay? So what's being said here is, what we're talking about here as the causes for birth, we're not talking about the causes way back when they were accumulated. We're not talking about the causes while they are getting strengthened, nor are we talking about when they have finally become strong. We're talking about what happens after they have become strong. So when they are already strong and there is a phase where before birth, this has already become strong, what's required between a state when the abilities have already become strong, so they have manifested as much as they could, but consciousness still is moving to take birth. In that interim phase, what's needed? When we're discussing that, there's only three things that are relevant. The only things that are relevant are the wrong conception that makes you see something incorrectly, the craving that makes you want it, and the intention that moves the mind towards that thing. These are the only three things that are required. So the distant causes that started along the way while they were getting stronger and when they had strengthened to their maximum potential, these are not relevant in the present discussion. What we need to know is what happens after that and before birth. That's why this is what we're discussing.
치심 참몽군도 마규위 디바로기 치심 내가마 치위심 고중네 치심 참몽군도 마규위 바로 될라 아니 개비 규카리레스다 세윤도 답에 타니고 규디시고다 디윤도 주버시바 텔레게 다동 타니와 게지시고요 와
So if you want to kind of get it into like a time frame, post-existence, before the completion of the mind at death. So before the subtle mind of death happens, in that coarser state when the death process is ongoing, what are the causes required at that point to give rise to birth? That's what we're addressing over here.
디체 다디 단다 세디갈 계셔와 다 디가 나신 지부지상 다 디니니 시사비절라 남시 디니마 텐사비절라 파르돌렙사나 딘데 퍼시버디 양 기시널다 페나 녜기 개발링이 지임바이나 다 녜나 슈고르와 소다 다 녜나 슈고디 녜나 슈게기 규카리레스 퍼시버디 녜나 슈게기 규카레라나 양 게네 카와카와이나 오 게네 텔라 양 트빌로게기 친줄로빌로 아니 풍불을 차베 차과 아니 텔라파 쇼유도 심중셈바 유루 요와 딩이 충딩이 유루 요와 체게 디숨부디기 토네 아니 녜기나로 슈루그레스 어디시오다.
So that's with respect to one life, like before this life completes itself. The other version of reading it, which can also be read in the same words, is after consciousness is separated from this body and before it enters the next physical state, right? So between death and conception, in that interim phase, what is leading the consciousness to take that next state? And in that middle phase, what are the causes? So then the causes of that phase are being discussed, and they're saying there is a mistaken conception or a mistaken perception of the state. So one sees where one is the state that is going to be taken incorrectly. There is craving towards the aggregates, and then along with that, accompanying is that intention or the mental factor of movement, of moving towards that thing. When these three come, then that's what connects to the state of birth. So that is the other way of reading this.
디인도다 대점례니 중위칠 세계 잠다디기 대점례 세계 잠다디기 응아르기 규대다 지기요 말이에요. 응아르기 규대다 여버체 다 응아르기 규대다 여베 토네 다 타마델 규카리 창국으로서는 디숨디 창거레스 디숨디 창고는 다 다지버레스 아니 게루레스 어디랍이요.
So in the first paragraph where it says it is from just these causes, the addition of just these does not eliminate that those are not needed. What it's saying is, because over here, what we're trying to figure out is what are the causes that are needed immediately preceding birth. We don't need to discuss those other states. So in the root verses, when it says, because it arises from these, just these are able to cause birth. The just these does not exclude the fact that formative actions or existence is required, but it's saying right now, because what we're talking about is the immediate causes for birth, just these are able to cause birth.
So the end 가르쳐 그래. 가장 아주 얘기 세바경이 쪼를 시행도 강라양 가지고 저버지 도바지 랑제 마리바 귤요 마르베 레장 귤요 마르베세나 여도 여러디 단당 아주 디 시고예요 말에 단당 아주 디 시베 갑을 디 딜을 잡아시베 갑 말에 생에서 라우지 얘기 강라 렌딘지 튕겨도 미시시비 유인요 마주세바 니셔바세 그 가서 가장 침벌와.
So if you remember, even before, when there was that section which was saying craving is the cause for birth, there was an opponent, or there was a view that there was a doubt that said, well, isn't ignorance and aren't karma and ignorance also causes for birth? And the reply was similar. It said they are, but there are reasons why right now, those are not being discussed. What we're trying to understand right now is what is the immediate cause for birth. And therefore, even though ignorance and karma might be causes, they don't need to be addressed over here.
다 딜나 시행체제 단다 델라양 대점기 중국 치르세기 규텔라 아니 레 여르베스는 요레스 딜레디 니버 두제기 레티야 마레 주버시버티야 마레스 디니가 응원도 조사버레스 응원도 조사네 아니 테마타 중의 레직 그 요레 디카렐라나 카가케요 마레 단기 계지 시대기 세바 대당 친주로 로케인데 코란이도 충딩이 심주센바 대가라레스 어떤 렌디 두신 레베 소로시 또 소르기요다.
So when they say isn't karma needed, in the way that I think this is unread or understood is karma is needed. We're not saying karma is not needed, but the karma that's needed is not this second link, nor is it the 10th link of existence, because what is being addressed here is what is immediately preceding, and neither is the second link nor the 10th link what is immediately happening before birth. These are two states that have to have already happened prior to it. And then there is still something else that has to happen between these and birth. That is the karma that we're talking about here. That mental movement, which is karma that we're addressing here, or it's the mental factor of intention, is nothing other than the accompanying mental factor that goes alongside or concomitant with craving and wrong perception.
Tadi indu semba theda rangni le yinchir sejdwa. Semba theda rangni le yinchir sedi semba sedi semba theda rangni di semba le yaju kurwa. Semba le jo semba le ani 지 중화 임비치를 세서로 근데 많이 봐시 단다 레스에 남행가 중궁기 델레 중화스 계자 많이 봐시 셈바 대다랑이 레레스 so the lake 하가시고 말스 디카두기 레디 대가랑레스.
So the last two lines of the verses are because intention accompanying those itself is karma, is saying because that intention that accompanies those two, and so the intention here that is able to cause birth, or the intention that is the immediately preceding requirement for birth to arise, is not some distant or some ripened state, but it is that intention that itself accompanies those two. That intention itself is karma, and that is the karma over here that is required.
So the less edi namingabalo tel less gejadi yoro yomaro or di kozul lamnatigba bebanal dindi yores.
So for those of you who know a little bit of Tibetan, the last two lines over here in Tibetan are Semba Deda Rani Le. And Le is, it can also mean from, something coming from somewhere, so a sense of provenance, where it comes from. Or Le also means karma itself. And so when you read it in Tibetan, Semba Deda Rani Le Yin can be read in two ways. One is, it comes from intention. Those come from intention. Those here referring to those two mental facts, those two, which is craving and wrong perception. They come from that intention. It could be read like that. Or the way that we're reading it here is, those intention that is accompanying those itself is karma. So it could be read as those come from intention. If you understand the lay as that grammatical particle that describes where something is coming from. If you understand it as lay, if you understand lay as karma, then it says that intention that is accompanying those two itself is karma. So there's different ways of reading this based on how you understand the lay over here. So that first way of reading it, which is it comes from those two, yeah, that's not the correct way to read it over here.
Ta semba theda segi ko mangsi indu kangla ani semba di dungela chinju lo theda sungdengi semba deni seba dan sungdengi semba nigalo ta kogu yodi theda se chigdi labr.
So then, because there's a plural deda, which in English is those, it refers to more than one, and so the one that is what that those refers to, this plural word refers to, is both the craving and the wrong perception. And so the intention that is accompanying those refers to the intention that is accompanying both those states. One is craving and one is wrong perception.
Ta kiju nyamba mes ta dik di enshik zawa dige kowa kewa lengi gyutta kowa kewa lengi gyutta nyeshudi tisum dredu was ta tisum budi sangsona ta kiru was di indu kala ta dindigi gyudi ta kowa ke gyudi sumbudi indu kala wang top dingi kibu dela somebody nyamba meba shin duwas.
So then the next, carrying on, the text says, the causes for birth have not weakened, which is basically reiterating the point that if these three are immediate causes for birth, and these three are present or have not been weakened through receiving initiations, then when these three are there and they have not weakened, there is no way that birth will not arise. And if initiation also cannot weaken these three, then the mere fact that these are present will mean that there has to be birth.
Ti induta wang de tobi kibula ninsam jewe gyuteda kanya nyamba meba yobichir wangi sibali towa minos.
That's why in the commentary it says, because the causes for connecting to a subsequent birth have not weakened in one who has received initiation, it does not liberate from existence, initiation.
Tiche. Tanga zu ngaranzu tiring wangji shu gurwa. Ta wangji shu che, wangji shu sebi jela, di jela ngaranzu gyula, chinju lo di meba chagi dube, seba meba chagi dube. Ta chinju lo da seba nye meba chagi mena, tingi du tsungdingi simju semba tinga meba chagi marwa. Meba chagi meba yindi, wang shu sebi kansa digi gyula tadung yang chinju lo ge digi yoba tang, ane seba ge digi yoba tang, yuna tingi du tsungdingi simju semba tinga yoba chagi gure. Di yindi, wang digi tanda di kama suwa, di magaba chup suwa. Wang di kama tuba di ko tsemi chup suwa, nyongwe toni tsemi chup suwa. So zata wangi korwa kewa limbi gyudi nyambar chigimi do so dirita.
So again, what this is when you, like say for instance today you receive initiation or you get initiation, you get initiated into something. That initiation after you received it, do you still have mistaken minds? And do you still have craving? If you have mistaken minds and you have craving, then because that craving and that mistaken mind, along with that omnipresent mental factor of intention that is always there, because these three are sufficient for birth to arise, someone who has received initiation, if they still have craving and wrong views, then this initiation has not been able to weaken or act upon the causes of birth in any way.
Patela kajigi lenkar yare, zawa, droda tokden chebayi tene matong wali kyur, matong shikchir drowa me tena duje semba min cher.
So now they come up with with another reply, and they say, they act as a support for motion and knowledge. They arise from the unseen. Through the ceasing of the unseen, going will be no more. Therefore, this is formation, not intention.
Yes. Tadil karse worsidu kajigi droda toden chebayin se digi ngazo kene shendu droya tang. Ani yu toya drodan se du kene shendu droya. Todan se gi ani yu toya. Denzo gi ten di karigi chigo warislana ten chegendi wangbu dires ta wangbu gi chigi yores. Tendi gi wangbu di kani chungbarelana lele chungi yores. Ta le de la ngazo matongwe le sede. Reso matongwe lele gyors. Ta ngazo le sabi negabla ngazo lunga gi le sabi kadur ngazo tongu tonya yorwa. Ta le de sa ni ngazo simgyu gana sha gi nibadi ngazo tongu marwa. Tela matongwe le se korwa. Ota matongwe lele chungi yores. Tendi matongwe le di ani wangi shigi meba sugu yores. Reso wangi meba suedi ani chinju logi lote dan seba ni di meba suedi mares. Wangi lega karire lana wangi lega di le di meba suedes. Reso wangi le di meba sugu res. Ta le di meba chaso na ani midi karshin kigi mare midi yangju kigi resin kigi mare kajin lana tama de la pa ke de la tama ta ni shigi gyu pa ke chungi di ko ledi re mato, matongwe ledi re mato, seba di mares. Ota kajigi ondi lenkyo mare.
So here what they're saying is, they act as a support. The they refers to the faculties. as a support for motion. Motion over here is going from one life to another. Knowledge is being able to know. So the faculties are the base or the support for taking birth or going from one life to another and for knowing things. These faculties arise from the unseen, and the unseen here refers to karma. Here karma is being called unseen because once karma has been accumulated and it stays in a latent potential state, in that state it is unseen, it's not seeable. So they are referring to this as karma. Now, what they're saying here is when you receive initiation of Maheshwara, what this initiation is doing is it's acting upon this unseen karma by nullifying it. What the initiation does is not act upon craving and wrong conception, but it acts upon this unseen karma, which is then would have then led to the continuing of the faculties. So the reason why receiving initiation is able to remove the seed for birth is because it acts upon this unseen karma which would have given rise to the faculties, which would then have been the base for birth and for perception, so for motion and knowledge. And because initiation can nullify this, it intervenes upon the causes, which are this unseen karma. Your presentation that it needs to work on wrong conception and craving is irrelevant. It doesn't need to do that. What it does is this. So craving is not the problem. The problem is that there is this karma that then creates the subsequent faculties.
So ta ranglugi tangi karishebare lose ni da sungdingi semba di ta lose ni da an tingi da sungdingi semba di kewi gudres ta tesamgi jungures like lady semba la she yundi khajigi semba la mashebache matongwe lede nyubatela so tena duje semba means like ranglugi semba res tingi da sungdingi semba di leres la dugala mares tingi da sungdingi semba ti kewa gu tesamgi gudi mares di gu lady karilano matongwe lede res ta khajigi otil ne usuyaw.
So if you recall, our position here was it is craving and wrong perception and the accompanying intention, these three. This accompanying intention is the karma that is needed for birth. That's how we identified it. What they're saying over here is this intention is not the karma that is the problem. The karma that is the cause for birth is not the way you Buddhists here are talking about that mental factor of intention that accompanies craving and wrong conception. It is this unseen potential that is the cause for birth, not the way you identify it as that accompanying mental factor or that concomitant mental factor that always accompanies those last states of a craving and wrong perception. So that's what they're saying. This is not karma. What you're identifying as karma, that's not the karma. That's not karma. That's not the cause for birth. The cause for birth is this unseen potential.
Deba wangjugu wangtobi kibudi chimar drawa mete gene shendo drawa da yudobi ten cheba wangbu yin las tene matongwa chodo chomingi lele gewa kurshings matongwe ledi wangi shigbi chirs tena chima ninsam jobe lene dagi yunde duje yingi seba do sundingi semba minno.
So the commentary says, one who has received initiation of, so Ishvara is Maheshwara, will not go to a later birth because the faculties are the support that allow for motion from one state of birth to another, and they are the support of knowing objects. They arise, the faculties, they arise from unseen karmas of dharma and non-dharma, and it is through the power of unseen karmas that they cease. Therefore, this karma that connects with the subsequent birth is the formation that is a quality of the self, not the intention that is concomitant with craving.
Ta tela ranglugi karisungore yoda mebe jinju chir cheba kela lo yini nyuthon shingi mayina deyo teda chimin ros.
And so Acharya Dharmakirti's response is, because it follows existence and non-existence, the power of cognition is seen in their activity. If not from another, with that existing, why wouldn't they go?
So that Kini shindu droba do yudobe ten cheba wangbo re teni matongwe chodo choma ingi leli kigidu labarwa kajigita leli kigidu labarwa di lab yung dwe la ranglu gi takara res di leli kigo re matongwe chodo choma ingi leli yang kigire leli kigire desamdo mase dindi gi shini shindu droba da yudobe ten chingi gi mila sobe cheba wangbo denzo Shinju logi loda seba da tsungdengi lodi yemegi jeso yang jubadi chubgitu was.
So here what we're saying is, Acharya Dharmakirti is saying is, this fact that motion and knowledge follow from the faculties, we accept. Not only do we accept, we see that that is why it happens. So they are the support for motion and knowing, for moving and knowing. Not just that, they are also the result of unseen karmas. Dharma and non-dharma are favorable and unfavorable. So not only are they the support for motion and knowledge, they are also the result of unseen karmas. All of that is true. But on top of that, what is also observed is that this fact of motion and knowledge also follows craving and mistaken cognition. And so because you see it when you see craving and wrong perception, and you don't see it when you no longer have craving and wrong perception, it follows from the existence and non-existence of craving and wrong perception as well. This is also observed. So everything that you have said is true, but on top of that, it's also seen that it's there when there is craving and wrong perception, and it's absent when there is no craving and no wrong perception.
The indita dindegi ten wangbo teda lokse de tsundingi lo nibudi gunde jeson dodo nye debachi. Jeson dodo nye debachi indu ane dindegi pungbo ten wangbo la soba sardu kebala lokse de tsundingi lo sembati ti nuba tongidus di nuba tonggido maado di lesana ani shambake goya mindus di tesamgi jungu chirise dagaran degires.
So your faculties that perform these actions or these activities, that we see follows from craving and wrong perception. And so because we see this is observed, this causal process is observed, if those causes are there will be the faculties that arise, and the faculties are then the source or the base for movement, for moving from life to life, and for knowing things, for perception. And therefore, as long as these are there, those faculties will arise. If these are absent, those faculties will not arise. Therefore, it's sufficient for having these as causes to give rise to the faculties. All this other thing is not required. These are sufficient. So just these are sufficient, remains as a fact.
Di da wangju gu wang to bi gibu teda chuchen yangsi chimur chi minro de lose do tsundingi semba teda wangi mashik par yobi yeshers.
The activity of the eyes and so forth, the eyes and so forth, which are the faculties, follows the existence and non-existence of the cognition that is concomitant with wrong craving.
Sonza da kaji gi len karikya bare wang digi lokse dan tsundingi semba di meba soyo mares ina ya matongwe ledi meba soyo res dus labarwa ta ranglu kharse ware matongwe le meba soyo laba ina da keba kembindus kanda disumbu di meba soyo mena disumbu di yoba ina ta digidus karjila na pungbu yu la ma droegi gyudila disumbu teazan kene saba la ma droegi gyula disumbu di yana tarang chubdugudus di indi kera ledi shiglana da mashiglana da ngal keba khaya mindus kewal kene la droegi gyuni kene la droegi gyula disum sangwa na tarang jesu dodo ngedi gidus dini wangi kerangi wangi mashig ba kerangi kelen songas di shing meba yana da wanshu gu wang tongi kansa di shidudu gangla chisim rakba kabdo di sumbuti yores ta. Rasila di wangi mashiba yoba kiran kelen solans. Di yindu ta di negabla ani chinjulogu lo yore, seba yore, ani yulo yobe sungding simju semba yore, di yoba ino ta ta jisons. Ani kiawai lingim ta shoba res, udi lapsh.
So, kind of like the point is, you have said that when you receive this initiation, what it does is it acts upon this unseen karma. It cannot act upon that intention that is concomitant with craving and wrong cognition. If you say that, then whether it acts upon this unseen karma and it can nullify it or exhaust it or not makes no difference to me whatsoever, because the fact is that as long as these three causes, which are wrong perception, craving, and intention, are there, the causes for moving from one state to another are there. The causes for movement towards things, towards states, that's there. You don't need anything else. So this person who has received initiation, and this initiation, let's say it has hypothetically also completely removed these unseen karmas, once you have seen that even though these karmas might not be there, but you have wrong perception and you have craving, and along with these two there is the concomitant mental factor of intention, whether these unseen karmas are there or not does not matter at that moment of death. As long as these three are there, it will connect to another state, because the mind will move to, there will be an act of motion towards another state. That's enough. So initiation has not been able to do anything, because the real causes are these. If these are there, that will happen. Whatever else it might do is irrelevant.
어디래? 다 딜라브나 신지어 다 간다르 ngazo ngaransu saja chingni chigla pha dwela saja chingni chig pha lela da leji sa yo bache da ledi meba cha sona ani saja chingni chigla pha ling mares da ledi meba so shana ngazo saja din shamba dil dwe ledi meba chana saja shamba du mares nan keje sheba chenar da keje de ji sheba ina ani dindegi le meba so changi langi midela 친주로글로 둥엘레 데버추비 친주로글로 아니 세바 요바체 아니 율로파 요에기 심중 셈바지 요바이나 꼭 한다 사지글라 데기 마르간다 사지직 직 도디다 다 코이 잡로레 레 예라나다 메 예라나다 메라나다 간다 디숨보디 요서나 미디 사지지네 직리 도디다.
So the example is, if let's say you have karma to go to somewhere, literally just move from one place to another, and let's say somehow you exhaust that karma to be able to move from place A to place B. But while you're in that place, whether you have removed this karma or you haven't removed this karma, if in that moment you have the wrong conception of that place, of somewhere else, and you have a wish to go there, and you have the mental factor of intention which moves your mind in that direction, you will move from place A to place B. So whether you have the karma that takes you there or not, or whether you don't have the karma that takes you there or not, as long as wherever you are, wherever anybody is, if these three factors are there, you will always be moving from one place to another, to another, to another, to another.
다 텔라 카지 카릴라레 카지기 게데 대다 누메나스 다 마레스 왕기 마통와 레시고지부 마레 록세던 순딩이 셈바데야 메바수그레스 왕기 메바수그레스.
So then here they reply, they say, no, that's not it. It's not just the unseen karmas that it makes powerless, it even removes the ability for craving and wrong perception. So the next verse is, if you reply they are powerless,
if
you reply that wrong craving and the intention have been made powerless by, not to buy, but by the initiation. Immediately after initiation and so on, apprehending, engaging, distraction and ceasing through the power of intention would no longer exist.
Wang deba, wang chema ta kibu teda sembe wangi yu zimbatan, yu chedabala jugbatan, yu shen la yanwatan, yan yanwang gogba so meba gyuros.
Commentary. Immediately after receiving initiation, those people would no longer, through the power of intention, apprehend objects, engage in the particulars of objects, get distracted by other objects, and cease these activities.
So that dinzo chawa changma wang top sangye kansala di meba cha ko kure. Kansa wangi di semba ga tu gu yuna di chawa changma meba cha du kure. Di kansa dinzo chawa dinzo mishiba te du kure wa. Ina wang top sangye dinzo chawa dinzo che di gitu was.
If initiation was sufficient now to render everything powerless, so render craving, wrong perception, and accompanying intention powerless, it would mean that as soon as one has received initiation, because that initiation has made this intention powerless, all things that we do driven by this intention, such as apprehending objects, engaging in the detail, getting distracted, stopping getting distracted, all of these that are driven or motivated by intention, they would also have to cease as soon as someone received initiation, because that's what initiation does. But despite having received initiation, we see that people keep acting, doing these actions, and therefore it's not enough.
Ya kajigi chidi teze lo me chir migurus.
If at that time, because there is no cognition, it will not come to be,
Jeba chidi semba teda yu niba mashibi ring yola shibis lo teda mebi chir kurbi chönum jungo migur shenas.
they reply, if as long as the power of that intention remains without being destroyed, they exist, but at the time of death, because there is no cognition, the dharmas of samsara will not come to be.
Ta mashi bardo simjung samba gi lega chigires. An shisabe jela ni chigmares. Kasna di khadu da ni wangi niba di tidi lega chen meba chigires. Di paru dela ko degires. Ta lang tinde la us la
So it seems like they're saying over here, until you die, the intention keeps doing things. But what the initiation does is, when you've received it, is that right before death, it will kind of nullify that power of intention.
So di labi di thanda timanam gi lo chamjus la so di lo re. Ha di do juro timanam gi lo chamjor sejara wangur to bi gibu chigame rigwa de rinda chema chamjo wa thal gibu di gyule rigwa chema chamjo bi gyu timanam gi lo di yobe che al di shash ta sangi don dir.
We'll do this tomorrow, the next part. Day after.